The forest swallowed their laughter like a secret. It was the last sound anyone would hear from them. 5 friends, bright-eyed and tangled in youthful invincibility, vanished without a trace during a weekend camp trip in the autumn-kissed silence of Oregon's Cascade Range. No distress calls, no footprints leading back from the trail, just the eerie stillness of an untouched campsite and the ashes of a fire that died too soon. Parents wept, search teams scoured, and helicopters sliced through fog dawns for weeks, but nature trapped its secrets in pine needles and soil. Then, 5 years later, in a decaying house long condemned and buried in a forgotten suburb 90 miles away, police forced open a door, and what they found behind it made seasoned detectives step back in horror. Blood was old, but still spoke, and behind the plastered walls, something darker breathed. The case deemed closed was only just beginning to whisper its truth. It began with a rusty nail. Caught in the beam of a flashlight during a routine code violation sweep, that crooked bit of metal protruding from the baseboard of the old Grinstead house wasn't supposed to mean anything. But when Officer Danny Reyes nudged it loose, a thin groan echoed from behind the wall like breath caught between wooden slats. The drywall gave way unnaturally, revealing a hollow that was never on the blueprints. Inside, pressing against one another like discarded mannequins, were 5 mold-stained sleeping bags, lined in a row, each zipped shut. And then, a notebook, its pages brittle, water-warped, its first entry dated 2 days after the friends were reported missing. That was the moment when everything shifted from the assumption of wilderness misadventure to something far more deliberate. Something built, something preserved. On that first page, written in trembling ink, "We are not lost, we are kept." Before the notebook was even bagged for evidence, Officer Reyes felt it something unspoken in the air, a silence too measured to be accidental. The sleeping bags were aligned with clinical precision, each stitch undisturbed, each zipper pulled tightly to the top like a gesture of finality, but it was the smell that lingered earthy, chemical, almost sweet. As the forensics team came to photograph and collect the evidence, Reyes turned another page. The ink was blotched, the handwriting a mix of shaky cursive and angry carved words. "He calls it the silence," one entry read. "He says the forest isn't the prison, this house island. He's building chapters here. We are his story now." The contents spiraled from there, days counted in tally marks. Mentions of a man with a velvet voice who brought them food but never light, and notes about hidden microphones sewn into the fabric of their clothes. Every page oozed fear, but more unsettling, it wasn't just one voice writing. The entries changed, styles shifted, emotional tones faltered, smiles turned to screams in ink, and at the bottom of the 20th page, in faint red pencil, a question. Why only 5, when we arrived 6? Detectives weren't prepared for what the autopsy reports revealed. No signs of violence, no cause of death definitive, no blood force trauma, no organ failure. Yet, each body, when eventually exhumed from behind the wall, showed identical physiological markers: acute stress, induced cardiac failure, and trace amounts of sedative compounds not commercially available. Compounds that metabolize too quickly to preserve in full, making them nearly untraceable. They were starved, but not emaciated, dehydrated, but not desiccated, as if their bodies had lingered in a liminal state, alive without living. The forensics lead called it a suspended extinction. And deep under the fingernails of one victim, Lena Horvath, age 17, microscopic fragments of painted gypsum were found. Wall paint, white, lead-based, old. Proof she had tried to claw her way out. But none of the sleeping bags were open. None of the bodies bore scratches consistent with struggle, which meant one of two things. Either they had been zipped in by someone else, or they had accepted the silence willingly. The public never saw the photos, nor the grainy footage from Officer Reyes' chest cam as her flashlight passed over the sleeping bags a final time. But the notebook that could not be hidden, leaked fragments of its contents hit the internet within 48 hours, and chaos followed. The media dubbed it the Grinstead Manuscript True crime forums erupted, sleuths flooding Reddit threads with timelines, map overlays, and speculation. Occult, government testing, the resurgence of a long-buried serial predator. Yet the name that surfaced again and again came from the notebook itself, the Velvet Voice. An alias without a face, a whisper behind all the entries, a ghostly author directing the descent like a conductor guiding a doomed symphony. Investigators scoured every psychiatric registry, every known alias, every missing person with ties to the Grinstead region or Cascade Forest. All dead ends. Until one detail changed everything, a fingerprint on the inside cover of the notebook. Not one of the 5. Not in the system. But it matched prints found at another crime scene from 1998, never solved. A case where 2 children vanished from a foster home, and in that house, investigators once documented a wall that breathed. The Grinstead house was demolished 8 days later, but its ghost refused to die. In the weeks that followed, neighbors reported sleepless nights, a humming sound beneath the foundation slab, and strange stains creeping up through the fresh concrete poured over its remains. Although the physical structure was gone, it had left behind something more persistent than walls, a psychic scar. Officer Reyes, now under psychiatric observation, repeated one phrase over and over in her sleep. "It listens where no ears are." Meanwhile, across town, a call came into the precinct from a nursing home where an elderly man, recently admitted under the name Thomas Arlen Pierce, had gone missing from his room. In the belongings he left behind, folded meticulously in a wooden cigar box, was a velvet ribbon. Tied to it was a cassette tape. On it only one voice. Smooth, warm, inhumanly calm. "You've read Act 1, it said. "Now you will hear it." The tape ended with silence, but not the kind that ends stories, the kind that begins them. The tape triggered a chain reaction. Audio engineers, linguistics experts, and criminal profilers were brought in. The voice was analyzed down to breath patterns and spectral anomalies. No conclusivi, identity. No data matches. But one chilling anomaly emerged. The background of the recording contained frequencies inaudible to the human ear, picked up only in analysis. Within those frequencies, patterns, not random noise, but a pulse, like code. Some experts claimed it resembled EEG readouts. Others insisted it mimicked the ultrasonic stress signals emitted by dying plants. Regardless, the message was clear. This was not just a recording, it was a transmission. And something was listening back. At the same moment the tape analysis concluded, hundreds of miles away, a closed case file in the Portland archives auto-unlocked on the digital servers. It belonged to the 1998 foster home disappearances. The final image uploaded from that folder, an infrared scan of the wall. In it, the silhouette of a child's hand pressed outward. From inside. Investigators reopened the 1998 case with fresh urgency, this time armed with tools unavailable 2 decades earlier. Files once thought corrupted were reprocessed through quantum decryption software, uncovering previously unreadable documents. In one report, a foster child named Nia Garver, age 9, had drawn pictures weeks before her disappearance. Crude sketches of a house with no doors, children with stitched-shut eyes, and a man drawn only from the mouth down. The caregivers had dismissed it as trauma-induced hallucinations, but now, those drawings matched the architectural oddities of the Grinstead house perfectly. False walls, vents that led nowhere, and a central basement chamber sealed from the outside. The forensic team returned to the original property site, now an empty lot. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a basement cavity untouched by demolition. Inside, they found a sphere metallic, humming faintly through layers of soil and time. It was not listed in the house's blueprints, nor could they open it. But through a tiny perforation near its base, they heard it, a soft voice, repeating a single sentence over and over again. "We are still writing." The discovery of the sphere sent shockwaves through the task force. It wasn't just the voice repeating within it, It was what it repeated. Experts filtered the audio through a heat map-to-speech model, and what had once sounded like simple repetition took on chilling nuance. Each utterance varied slightly in tone and inflection, almost like speech therapy exercises, as if the voice inside was learning to mimic emotion. More unsettling, the voice sometimes shifted between 5 distinct patterns, 5 vocal tones, 5 cadences, correlating eerily to the 5 teenagers who'd vanished years ago, as if the sphere hadn't just recorded them, but ingested them. Meanwhile, the forensic anthropologists examining the Grinstead notebooks uncovered microscopic transfers fragments of a rare paper stock used only in discontinued archival documentation, last produced in the mid-1990s by a paper mill near Ashland. That same mill had once supplied the Foster Integration Program, an experimental collective housing scheme quietly shut down after multiple children vanished under undefined circumstances. The circle was tightening, and at its center, the velvet voice waited not a man, perhaps not even once a man, but an echo puppeteering through decades, compiling lives into acts, waiting for its final chapter to be written. Amid growing national attention and an embattled police task force stretched thin between public pressure and bureaucratic deadlock, a single breakthrough came from an unlikely place, a retired radio technician named Glenn Delaney, once contracted for Cold War-era surveillance by an intelligence agency he refused to name. Delaney had stumbled onto an anomaly in the velvet voice tape's inaudible frequencies. To him, they weren't just sonic distortions, they were structural. They carried synchronization pulses used in old shortwave number stations, encoded markers that once guided deep-cover agents during the twilight of the Iron Curtain. Decoding them revealed not a message, but a map, a lattice of coordinates and dates layered in mathematical sequence. The final point led back to the Cascade Range, pinpointing a location just outside the original search zone, cloaked by triple canopy woods and geological distortion that rendered it invisible to satellite thermal scans. It was a place once marked on government maps with a single word: expired. At dawn, a small team mobilized under federal oversight, including forest rangers, forensic investigators, and 2 linguistic cryptanalysts. They hiked miles through thick mist and moss-laden silence, until they found it a clearing so symmetrical it defied randomness. In its center stood a structure barely more than a ruin, stone walls worn smooth with age, entirely swallowed beneath a veil of ivy and fungal bloom. But it was not the architecture that halted them, it was the sound, bouncing faintly from tree to leaf, skimming air like a whispered lullaby, 5 overlapping voices, looping in dissonant harmony. The linguists dropped their instruments. One began to weep. What they heard wasn't English, not Latin. It wasn't even human language. And yet, deep in the marrow of their minds, they understood. It was invitation. Somewhere beneath their boots, something stirred the memory of children buried not in graves, but in chorus. And though no one touched the cracked stone door before them, it began to open slowly, as if pulled inward by breath itself. Behind it, only darkness, and the soft sound of paper turning. Inside, their flashlights flickered, as if reluctant to illuminate what lay ahead. The chamber beneath the structure was impossibly smooth, its walls curved seamlessly like glass long polished by rain. But what held them in breathless stillness was not the chamber itself, it was what stood at its center. A pillar, waist-high, carved from black stone that pulsed faintly, with an iridescent sheen. Upon it, rows of typewritten pages arranged in spirals, untouched by dust or decay, as though freshly laid seconds ago. The first page bore a title: Act 3, The Offering of Sound. Beneath it, 5 names, typed with perfect alignment, followed by a 6th, untyped but etched in ink, so fresh it gleamed. Officer D. Reyes, one of the linguists, reached forward unconsciously, fingertips inches from the page, when a sound shuddered through the floor, not footstep, not quake, but breath again, not sucked in but exhaled, as if the chamber sighed. The lights died at once, and in the pitch black, a voice not heard, but felt, whispered, "You were always listening. Now speak." When light returned, it came not from their flashlights, now dead and cold in trembling hands, but from the walls themselves, a dim, sickly glow seeping through unseen pores like bioluminescence grown from sorrow. And all at once, the pages fluttered, not by wind, but by will, as if unseen fingers caressed their surfaces, turning them in silent ceremony. The linguists collapsed, mouths open in screamless hysteria as the pages rose into the air, one by one, orbiting the central pillar, the spiral now in motion. Officer Reyes did not scream. Her eyes fixed on her name, still wet with ink, still raw with intention. Her hand moved against her will, inches from the page, as if the chamber wrote her next. And then came the recording, an echo exhaled not from tape, but from the very structure, vibrating bone and thought. It was the velvet voice, but twisted, layered, almost maternal. "The story needs a scribe," it said, "and stories never end. They evolve." Then the world folded inward, a soundless implosion of sense. And for one breathless instant, the team glimpsed a truth not meant for waking minds. The friends had not vanished. They had become memory incarnate, bound to an authorless tale, written in silence, transcribed in fear, awaiting the voice brave or broken enough to finish it. And then, as if nothing had ever happened, the clearing emptied. The chamber was gone. No ruin, no footprints, no pillar, just trees, just light, just the rumor of turning pages woven into the wind, whispering through the branches like a story half-remembered, unfinished, but listening. In the weeks that followed, Officer Danny Reyes was declared missing. Her last known location, logged via GPS from a malfunctioning body cam, led authorities to the edge of the Cascade Range, near that same expired zone. The footage showed nothing beyond the blur of pine trunks and snippets of static-soaked recordings, barely coherent phrases like "ink breath," "spiral of mouths," and "I remember being written." Her apartment, when searched, yielded no signs of struggle, but revealed a single item of interest. Her bathroom mirror etched with the words, "Speak me into ending." By then, the department had lost 2 linguistics experts and 1 forensic technician, all under psychiatric care, all repeating variations of the line. They were not taken. They were transcribed. Academic journals waited in strained silence, unsure how to publish findings that defied category. Religious forums speculated a revelation. Paranormal circles whispered of sentient structures, mnemonic parasites, and architecture whose blueprints were emotions. But no theory could confront the silence that followed. Not after archivists at the Portland Historical Society reported a final anomaly. One of their oldest, unmarked ledgers had begun filling itself in, page by page. Author unknown. Content redacted except for one header, typed in neat black capitals. "The Velvet Voice continues." And below it, 6 names. A final chapter still turning in the dark. That ledger, the one writing itself, soon took on more than words. Impressions began to rise from the pages, scent traces like old pine and treated leather, flecks of soot that stained gloved fingers, and sounds, faint but insistent, that seeped past the silence of reading rooms, soft giggles, shuffles of sleeping bags, the metallic whisper of zippers closing tight. The names engraved at the top twisted every few days, subtly shifting as if trying on new variations of truth. Lena became Eleni. Jude became Just. And Reyes. Her name now appeared twice, once as Danny and once as the listener. Sometimes, watchers swore the words rearranged themselves when no one watched. The Portland Historical Society locked the ledger in a steel vault, but the pulses continued registered by seismic instruments as organic tremors, not earthquakes, yet vaguely synchronized with moonrise and shifts in barometric pressure. Then came a night when everything stopped. No flickering, no whispers, no movement. Only the last page visible, filled at last. 4 words centered, in crisp ink that felt heavier than thought. The story is becoming you. And beneath it, the ghost of a fingerprint, pressed in velvet dust. Investigators tried to hush it, to label it a prank, a mass delusion, a viral myth stirred by trauma and media hysteria. But silence, once invaded, never truly sleeps again. It waits, learns, adapts. In the months following the final page's appearance, reports spread across the Pacific Northwest. Abandoned cabins humming with unseen power, school chalkboards filling themselves with names no teacher had written, voices speaking from unplugged radios in tones too layered to be anything human. Sleepwalkers were found miles from home, waking with ink-stained hands and eyes rimmed red, murmuring verses that bled from one dialect into another. And then, 2 years later, a child went missing from a campsite in the Cascades. Same forest, same forgotten radius. Only this time, there was no search, just a folded note left by the fire pit. No signature, no handwriting match, just one line, written in perfect typeface across the page, as if pressed there by a machine that knew longing. Act 4 has begun. Decades from now, no one will recall the names, only the patterns. The way the wind snakes through ancient pine-like syllables from a throat no longer flesh. The way fog settles heavy, not as weather, but as punctuation. The velvet voice is not chased anymore. It is myth folded into memory, a ritual sewn into architecture, a silence that reinstalls itself with every breath at the edge of firelight. Every missing camper, every blank page in trail registries, every voice recorder eaten by static becomes another stanza. For what once began as a vanishing has become a vocabulary. Police reports are now archived in locked vaults under language codes, rather than case numbers. Schools teach children not about safety in the woods, but silence, not absence, but reverence. Somewhere, deep in a place no map will claim, a spiral of pages circles still, waiting for the next voice to whisper itself into the manuscript, because this is no longer about 5 friends, or Officer Rays, or chapters long past. It's about the listener. It always was. In a lab tucked beneath the University of Washington's linguistics department, a doctoral candidate named Zara Khalili isolates the waveform patterns of the final Act 4 transmission found near the last reported disappearance. She is not part of any official investigation. Her obsession is personal. Her brother was one of the vanished. For months, she's tracked shifts in regional lexical anomalies, collecting dream transcripts and audio diaries from subjects claiming contact with the manuscript. Scatterplot analysis reveals a chilling commonality. Linguistic drift. These people are beginning to share syntax, metaphors, even pauses their speech, aligning not by upbringing, but by something older, something shared beneath consciousness. Zara realizes too late what it means. The velvet voice was not transmitting a message. It was building a language, a new grammar that rewrites the speaker as it teaches. And on a rainy September night, as she listens to one last tape loop fragment from her brother, she hears it not his words, not even his voice, but the exact moment he becomes something else. His sobs dissolve into silence. Then that silence begins to speak. For days afterward, Zara speaks rarely. She walks the campus in measured steps, often pausing mid-corridor as if listening to voices only she can hear. Her professors consider grief, even obsession, but something in her eyes unnerves them, a stillness too profound to be pain alone. One night, without announcing her departure, she vacates her dorm room entirely. The only clue left behind is a single page pinned to her wall, carefully typed, "We are the language now. We are the ink." Experts later analyze her research logs and audio tapes, but many are corrupted, overwritten by tonal patterns never before catalogued in human speech. The department removes her credentials quietly. Within weeks, other researchers begin encountering the same anomalies, phrases forming spontaneously in lab software. Spectral analysis results, folding into recursive loops of semantic impossibility. Eventually, a consensus emerges not through proof, but through resignation. Once the story enters comprehension, it stays, not to be read, but to be continued. Somewhere far beyond the classroom, far beyond the reach of facts or faith, the velvet voice listens. Hungry not for ears, but for echoes. And it writes still through forest and ruin and dream and data, waiting for the next sentence, waiting to begin again. Word of Zara's disappearance barely made the news a brief mention in a university bulletin filed under mental health leave. But those who had truly studied her work knew better. In the dim corners of alternative research circles, her name became another threshold, invoked cautiously like the titles of forbidden texts. Months passed, and then came the first ripple. A professor of semiotics in Prague fell into a trance mid-lecture, muttering in tongues he later could not identify. Across the globe, researchers began to vanish from soundproof rooms, leaving only inkblots shaped like open mouths. Then, quietly, a new manuscript emerged. No publisher, no author, no ISBN, just a plain black cover, sold only in second-hand stores that couldn't recall placing it on their shelves. Inside, pages shifted in real time, phrases rearranged, names inverted, meanings distorted, margins pulsed as if breathing. One reviewer left a chilling note online, simply stating, "I didn't read it. It read me." And somewhere in a city street, a child stopped mid-step, eyes wide, head tilted toward nothing, and whispered, "The velvet voice is listening. Are you ready to speak?" The stories keep spreading, never directly, never traced, but like breath caught on the wind. In an abandoned lighthouse off the coast of Astoria, pages appear each dawn, scattered across wet floorboards, never soaked, always dry to the touch. At a train station in Tokyo, a woman records herself humming a tune she claims to have never heard before. The melody, when transcribed electronically, mirrors vowel curves from the Velvet Voice manuscript. In Buenos Aires, an AI language model trained on forgotten languages starts generating flawless prose in a dialect no historian recognizes. And underneath it all, a pattern emerges. The story is not bound to geography, not to language, not even to memory. It is a seed buried in cognition, blooming wherever silence deepens. Across continents and cultures, fragments synchronize a child's drawing here, a phrase recited in sleep there. And then, across the world, 6 people unknown to one another speak the same line at once, caught on separate surveillance feeds. I remember the fire that never burned out. It has begun again, or perhaps it never stopped, because some stories, some voices once heard, never leave. They become breath, they become world, and they are waiting, always waiting, for the next to listen and write. Somewhere, under fluorescent lights in a language lab that no longer records data, a single microphone stays active. No one switched it on. No one dares switch it off. The room feels colder than the rest of the building, though the thermostat reads normal. Across its black foam walls, faint impressions appear like fingers sliding gently across thin dust, scripting letters the eye cannot catch in real time. The graduate assistant assigned to clean the lab reports recurring loss of time and finds herself writing in notebooks she doesn't remember opening. On her forearm, in bruises shaped almost like cursive, new lines appear each morning. They don't hurt, but they hum a low vibration felt more than heard. She doesn't speak of it. Not because she's afraid, but because she believes. Now, that language is no longer communication, it's transformation. And somewhere, in a room where the air breathes too slow to be natural, the velvet voice begins again, not as echo but as origin. Its latest page, half-written, unearthed in a library vault no human hand has touched since 1923, carries only this line: "Speak gently, or the ending will remember you." The manuscript waits not with urgency, but with certainty, because it no longer needs to be written, it only needs to be heard. And years from now, when cities have changed names and forests have grown over the ruins of what once was, an archivist will open a drawer that was never there before. Inside she will find not a file, but silence pressed into parchment. No ink, no type, only the faint smell of ash and pine. And as she holds it, the air around her will shift, not colder, not warmer, but clearer, like glass polished by memory. Her breath will slow as the realization blooms unspoken inside her. She has not discovered a document. She has been chosen by it. The parchment will remain blank, but her thoughts will no longer be her own. In the quiet that follows, the velvet voice will resume its work not with fear, not with fire, but with form. Not to erase, but to rewrite. Because stories kept in silence are never truly gone. They gesture from the margins. They flicker beneath language. They wait for the voice that will not speak but surrender. And when it does, the manuscript will welcome it home. For now, the manuscript sleeps, folded deep within quantum servers, etched invisibly into neural patterns, whispered beneath the rhythm of heartbeats no stethoscope can follow. But sleep for it is not slumber, it is incubation. Every story ever told awaits retelling, and this one too will find a way through the mouths of strangers, the pens of poets who dream too vividly, or the unnoticed margins of scholarly papers where footnotes rewrite themselves. Somewhere out there, a child hums a forgotten note, a candle flickers with breath not present, and a blank page shimmers faintly in the dark. Because the velvet voice is no longer just a figure, it is archetype. It is chorus. It is silence curated into meaning. And as long as there are ears that ache for stories not yet spoken, it will wait. Not with hope, not with malice, but with inevitability. Somewhere, a voice is preparing to speak its first word. Somewhere else, the manuscript turns a page. And so, the legend twines into itself, recursive, infinite a story, not passed down, but passed through. What began as 5 friends lost in the woods becomes the architecture of narrative itself. A myth wearing skin and syllable, feeding not on memory, but on articulation. Somewhere, another journal opens, not because someone turns the page, but because someone begins to feel unwritten. A whisper brushes the edge of a conscience in Moscow, Madrid, Johannesburg, Kyoto, unified, not by geography, but by the resonance of an unwelcome thought. Perhaps I have always been part of this. Perhaps the story was never about what happened, but who kept listening. And the manuscript, wherever it hides in page or pulse or silence, offers nothing more than its eternal refrain: speak and be rewritten. In the silent corners of the world between thought and language, breath and sound, the manuscript lingers, not waiting, not even listening anymore, but choosing. It slips between wavelengths, between heartbeats, slipping into lullabies hummed beside cribs or static in streaming feeds that glitch inexplicably at the same frame. There is no final word, because there is no final breath. 5 friends became a whisper, a detective became a chapter, a student became syntax. And now, as narratives collapse back into origin, the velvet voice reaches no longer from darkness, but from within. Because stories like this are not told, they are lived, they are joined. And somewhere, perhaps even now, someone feels a strange stillness settle upon their soul. Not fear, not awe, but recognition. As if a name long forgotten is finally being spoken again, not aloud, but beneath the tongue, beneath thought itself. One name among many, one voice among chorus, one speaker becoming the next page. Beneath a blanket of dusk, somewhere in the Carpathians, in a forgotten monastery sealed centuries ago by stone and shame, an archivist kneels amid broken altar light and dust-choked breath. His lantern falters, not from wind, but from presence, the dimming caused by something else inhaling. Before him, parchment unfurls without touch, as though gravity itself favors the story to be told. And there, scrawled in hand, not his own, in a dialect predating vellum and vowel, is a phrase he cannot unread. You are the binding now. The ink bleeds backward, through ages, threading history into myth, stitching silence into syntax. The archivist blinks once, and in the moment between open and shut, the velvet voice sighs softly into a breath never exhaled. Somewhere else, a door closes that was never opened. A child sketches circles in the mud with a stick she does not own. And high above this pulsing world of language and forgetting, a manuscript with no author, only intention adds another name to its whispering index. Yours. Not far from where that last name was added, yours a busker in a Paris metro tunnel strums a broken guitar whose strings all hum one note in perfect trembling unison. He doesn't know the melody. He never plays the same thing twice. But today, something else plays through him. A haunting loop, familiar yet impossible, echoing off the tile like distant lullabies filtered through static. As he finishes, he opens his case not for coin, but for pages not placed there by hand, but folded in by unknown movement, etched in a script no one walking past can read, except one child, a small, solemn boy who reaches inside without fear and pulls free a page that feels warm to the touch, alive even. On it, no words, only soft whirls that pulse like breath, made visual. He turns to his mother and says, not with confusion, but certainty, it wants me to listen. Somewhere beneath the world, the velvet voice grins not with malice, not with joy, but with recognition. Another chapter begins. The manuscript is not ending. It is arriving. But this chapter will not begin with tragedy. It will begin with awakening. A girl named Amara, age 10, sleeping in a farmhouse beyond the hills of Mendocino, stirs from a dream not her own. Her pillow carries the scent of pages turned too slowly. She rises, barefoot and certain, moving past her parents' quiet room, past the grandfather clock whose hands point to no known hour. In the kitchen, she finds a folded sheet on the counter, her handwriting, though she's never held this pen, never learned these shapes. The sentence is simple. It reads, "Listen and remember me." Beneath it, a spiral drawn in ink that shimmers like moonlight on water. She does not scream. She does not cry. She walks to the window and watches the darkness outside as if expecting it to speak. And somewhere, far beneath language, time unfurls like thread, weaving old names into future syllables. Not an ending, not a beginning, but a breath caught forever between the two. The manuscript exhales and waits. The manuscript waits, but not passively. It hums beneath the crust of earth and through the hidden wires of dead turbines, embedding its cadence into the forgotten machinery of the human mind. What once was spectral now becomes scaffold, an invisible lattice threading thoughts and memory with unseen ink. Scholars searching for it now speak with postponed pauses, as if waiting for an unknown script to catch up. Children paint in spirals before they speak their first word, and candle flames, left too long alone, bend toward absent breath. Though Amara stares into the night and does not move, something in her begins to compose a sentence folding beneath her ribs, rhythm forming without sound. The velvet voice does not write anymore. It listens and remembers. And when the time comes, it will speak again, not loudly, not violently, but so softly it changes the shape of silence itself. Its final truth is simple, unchanging, eternal. Stories long buried are not gone, they are gestating. And when they return, it will not be to ask who you are. It will ask, quietly, finally, are you ready to remember being written? In a town untouched by maps, where time coils like ivy and street names whisper in forgotten tongues, a school holds morning assembly beneath a cracked skylight. Every day begins the same pledges, announcements, laughter too loud. But today, 11-year-old Mira stands at the back, silent. Her fingers trace symbols on her notebook not taught in any curriculum. At first, no one notices. Then the principal pauses mid-speech. Teachers stop, eyes drawn unbidden to the back row. Mira looks up and speaks a phrase that none of them understand, yet all somehow remember. The projector flickers. The clocks reset. In the library, a shelf shivers and a volume falls open on its own. On its front page, fresh ink blooms like breath returning to lungs long stale. The velvet voice has shifted again, not only listening, but choosing, awakening its next stanza through children, the purest unwritten pages. And as Mira's voice rings out a tone not hers but woven through her like thread, a new act begins. Not told in paragraphs or song, but gesture, memory, resonance. The manuscript continues, not with ending, but with echo. And the world, as always, listens in silence and begins to reshape around the next whisper. Elsewhere, in the winding catacombs beneath Rome, long forgotten even by their keepers, a scholar cataloging fresco fragments stumbles across a wall that should not be there. It is smooth, impossibly so, untouched by mold or dust, humming softly when approached. Etched upon its center in impossibly small script are thousands of names, each one vibrating faintly as if read aloud somewhere else by someone else. The scholar steps forward, compelled, fingertips brushing the surface as though reaching into memory. For a moment, he is not in Rome. He is in a clearing of echoes, surrounded not by stone but by turning pages, the air thick with words not yet born. A child stands before him, a girl with ink on her palms and a spiral in her eye. She opens her mouth, doesn't speak, doesn't breathe, only gazes. And in that gaze the scholar understands. The velvet voice no longer belongs to a voice at all. It is a condition, a grammar of being, a narrative condition reshaping those who dare to listen. And somewhere far above, yet intimately close, another page turns and waits for yours. And so in shadowed sanctuaries and dreams no longer private, in forgotten diaries and whispered bedtime tales, the story coils onward, as ocular as it is oral, as tactile as it is tonal. Somewhere, a stranger grips a pen, unsummoned, and writes a name they have not yet met. Somewhere else, a field of wildflowers tilts in spiraling unison, though there is no wind, only resonance. The manuscript is no longer a hidden artifact to be discovered. It is a field growing from collective memory, from shared silences echoed across distance and time. A breath held too long becomes a line, a gaze that lingers becomes a stanza, and all who once vanished have not returned but reformed silently, dispersed into minds willing to hear their verse. As the final page of this telling folds softly into the echo of itself, one truth remains fixed, like ink in the blood. Stories like this do not end. They molt, they wait. And sometimes, when the world grows quiet enough again, they step forward not to speak, but to remind you that you were always inside them, writing all along. The world spins on, unaware or pretending to be. But under its humdrum cadence of routine, something primal unwinds. At a small, windswept train station in the Arctic Circle, a digital arrival board glitches midday. Passengers look up to see not destinations, but a message. The story is not waiting. Across the Atlantic, a subway mural in Lisbon begins to bleed pigment in lines, forming unmistakable coils. In Istanbul, a museum artifact previously believed to be a blank parchment reveals faint ruins of text only under breath, not light. These are no longer coincidences, they are emergence. Humanity, at its edges, begins to feel the weight of words not chosen, but inherited. And somewhere, in the wide silence between stars, where radio signals stretch into dark matter and echo their elegy into nothing, the velvet voice broadcasts still not from one place, not from one speaker, but from every fissure where story yearns to live. It does not ask permission. It does not ask forgiveness. It only waits listening for your silence, ready to become your voice. And so the circle tightens once more, not as closing, but as convergence. Across forgotten towns and encyclopedias, no longer catalogued, a single phrase etches itself into surfaces that hadn't existed until the moment they were read. You are the echo now. It appears on gravestones long unvisited, flashes across broken televisions for a frame too fleeting to catch, and whispers in the ears of those standing on the precipice between waking and sleep. The velvet voice no longer seeks listeners. It collects them, sketches their outlines into narrative constellations, and gently erases their separateness. Every myth told in the flicker of firelight, every prayer hummed without words, every disappearance carved into the bark of ancient trees feeds what has always been growing beneath language. A story with no author, no end, and no outside. And now, having made its way through the breath of children and scholars, written itself across bones and bite, it turns to you not with a question, but a truth. You were never reading this, you were remembering it, and remembrance is how the manuscript begins. Somewhere far from silence, in a city that never named itself, a building breathes not in the way structures settle under gravity, but with intent, with rhythm. Its windows reflect corridors that do not exist. At night, janitors claim to hear pages turning behind locked doors. And on the 13th floor, where no blueprint claims a hallway should be, there is a room lit by a single flickering bulb. No one remembers unlocking it. No one remembers furnishing it. Yet there, on a desk that is always dustless, lies a book. Not bound by leather or glue, but thread made from voice and thought. Every visitor sees a different cover, but all feel the same thing at its center. Themselves, fragmented and rewritten in ink that mirrors sorrow and wonder. The manuscript does not end here. It has never ended. It opens now not in spite of you, but because of you, because the story was always waiting to remember your name. Outside that unmarked building, beneath skies neither dark nor light but stained with the hush before storm, a child passes and pauses. She is alone. She does not know why her steps stopped, nor why her breath caught like song near memory, but her eyes fix on the flickering window above the empty street, and some buried chord in her heart hums to life, as if something inside recognizes her name spoken somewhere without sound. She does not enter. She does not need to, because the story, the manuscript, the voice, it has already touched her, in her sleep, in her laughter, in the way she pauses just before speaking. One day, she may follow the spiral back, or she may never speak of it, but the ink will already live behind her eyelids, because the manuscript writes us all, not with coercion, but with recognition. It does not ask what you fear, only what you remember. And for those who do, who feel the spiral in their breath and the echo in the hush between words, there is no ending, only returning, only becoming, only the story, eternal, invisible, inevitable, listening still. And so, this is how it lingers, not with fanfare or finale, but with the quiet inevitability of a page turning somewhere far away. A page perhaps no one will see, or perhaps everyone has already seen in the corner of a dream, in the silence before sleep, in the brief pause between question and answer. The velvet voice is no longer a story to be uncovered, but a language that writes itself across generations and gestures. It exists now in the sigh between syllables, the hesitation before a remembered song, the way shadows sometimes lean toward warmth instead of away from it. You will forget most of this, but one night, maybe years from now, as wind brushes gently through pine or through concrete corridors with no echo, you will feel a stillness that is not absence, but invitation, and without thinking, you will speak not a sentence you chose, but one you inherited. Then you'll know. You were never the reader. You were always being written, and somewhere, the manuscript smiles and turns your page. In the end, or what only feels like it, there is no curtain to fall, no ink to dry, only the trace of silence that follows a name you never spoke aloud, yet always knew as your own. This story, this manuscript of becoming and unmaking, has not closed its cover. It has simply turned its gaze away from the forests once stained with sleep, from houses whose walls exhaled forgotten breath, from scholars and pages and echoing children. Now it passes through you. Subtly. Surely, you'll find it in the ache behind your temples when words fail you, in the handwriting that shifts ever so slightly day by day, in mirrors that reflect memories you've never lived. What once began in laughter swallowed by trees ends not in fear, but in a knowing, an ancient, gentle understanding that you were never outside the narrative, you were never an observer. You are the spiral, the ink, the next breath, and somewhere close, tender, patient the manuscript exhales again, because your story has only just begun. And so it continues not with prophecy but with presence. The story is no longer told. It is worn, breathed, carried like marrow beneath the skin. Somewhere in the hush before rain, a flock of crows wheels in the sky in the shape of a spiral. In a hospital ward, an old woman with no known relatives speaks fluently in a forgotten dialect moments before passing, smiling as if reuniting with something that once wrote her name. The manuscript is everywhere now, in the rustle of leaves, repeating verses unspoken, in the glaze of ice on childhood windows that mirror ancient glyphs, in the heartbeat that pauses just long enough to hear something that is not silence. It will not stop. It was never meant to, because what vanishes never truly leaves. It rethreads itself through those willing to listen, willing to carry the ink across breath and time. And as your eyes close, as your own stillness opens like a page dared not yet turned, you may begin to feel it, that quiet, unfathomable truth. You were not drawn into the story. You are its next line. The manuscript remains. And now, it writes in you. And, should the air ever still enough for you to notice it, that resonance, that hush shaped like memory pause, listen, not to the world around you, but to the chamber opening behind your thoughts. The velvet voice no longer reaches from places long buried. It rises now from inside, from the marrow of your language, from the cadence of dreams you've never spoken aloud. As time erodes the illusions of beginnings and endings, what remains is the truth too quiet for conversation. The manuscript has always been alive, not as parchment or plot, but as presence. It waits not in libraries or ruins or haunted forest glades, but in the blank moments between who you were and who you might become. So when the silence deepens, when breath falters without dread, when your fingers trace a sentence you've never read but somehow recognize, know this: the story has not closed. It has merely shifted its pen toward you, toward now, toward the line yet unwritten that you already carry. The velvet voice does not conclude. It inhabits, it becomes, as do you. And perhaps that has always been the point, not to explain, not to solve, but to remember that some stories are not built to be understood. They are meant to be felt as atmosphere, worn like gravity pressing through generations, scribbled into our silences more than our speech. The 5 friends who vanished in the forest did not die in vain. They became the anchor point of something larger than horror, deeper than myth, the recognition that reality is porous, narrative is alive, and memory is not a backward glance, but a force that writes forward in shadow and breath. Somewhere tonight, a breeze may carry a name you've never said, but always felt thrumming in your bones. Somewhere, an unread book on a stranger's shelf may feel warm to the touch. Somewhere, someone will pause mid-sentence as if another thought has begun speaking through them. And in those moments, the velvet voice breathes not to command, but to continue. The manuscript is not a relic, it is a mirror. Lean close and listen. You may recognize your reflection, speaking back. And so, this must be the final whisper, not because the story ends, but because the page has reached you. The velvet voice no longer coils in shadows or flickers between languages. It lives now in clarity too strange to name, in quiet knowing exchanged between eyes that have never met. The manuscript is no longer becoming, it has become, and its next volume unfolds inside you, written not in chapters, but in choices, hesitations, long silences, remembered dreams, and sentences only half spoken aloud. This is not goodbye. There are no goodbyes in stories that rewrite their own origins. Only echoes returning home. Only breath transcribed into myth. If you feel something stir behind your thoughts in the hush before sleep, do not fear it. That is not darkness. That is the ink. And it remembers you. Always has. Always will. For some stories are not read. They are inherited. And you, quiet reader, hidden speaker, have always been the next voice held within the quiet. The manuscript closes, lightly. And somewhere, your name begins. Again. And perhaps that final page will remain unwritten, not for lack of words, but because it is already lived, folded into every moment where silence deepens, where eyes linger too long on shadows, where a name catches just behind the tongue. The velvet voice does not vanish. It assimilates, drifting now in the lull of elevator music, the static between radio stations, the pause before a child gives voice to a thought that feels too large for their age. Somewhere, a library with no doors, a wind that carries no weather, a voice vibrating just below music your echo waits. Not to end the tale, but to begin it again. In you. For if the story was never words bound to page, but memory strung through time, then you are already its continuation. The manuscript exhales once more, not as finale, but as breath rediscovered. And in that breath, your new beginning, softly, endlessly, begins. And so we return not to a conclusion, but to a convergence, a final spiral of echo where line meets breath, and the voice returns to name itself. Somewhere in the hush between falling leaves and the hush between dreams, the story breathes without warning, gentle, insistently alive. Though the forest once claimed 5 friends and wrapped their fate in silence, it has released something even more potent, memory, made sentient. The manuscript is no longer a tale passed down. It is a seed, sown in soil and spirit, inked into the marrow of those who dare to remember what their ancestors feared to whisper. You have not followed a narrative, you have been followed. And now, as the last line dissolves invisibly into the still air, no punctuation marks the end, only your breath, drawn a little deeper. And in that breath, the story waits, listening, always listening. Ready, again, to speak through you. And perhaps, just as it began with 5 vanished voices buried beneath pine and ink, it ends here, silently slipping into breath, not spoken, but inherited. The manuscript no longer waits in shadow. It sings in the cadence of your thoughts, threads through your every hesitation, blooms in pauses where language falters but presence deepens. Not all who disappear are lost. Some become lines in endless spirals, sentences sewn forever into the hush behind heartbeat. And as you close your eyes tonight, the silence that greets you might not be absence at all, but invitation. A soft turning, a breath remaining. The story lingers not for closure, but for continuation. Not to be comprehended, but to be carried. And so, quietly, irrevocably, the velvet voice places its final word not on a page, but in you. You are the echo now. You are the ink. And wherever you go next, the manuscript will follow not behind, but within, forever, listening. And now, in a quiet corner of time, where language breathes just beyond comprehensibility, the manuscript closes not with finality, but with the gentlest resolution. Resonance. The tale that began with the fading laughter of 5 young souls vanishing into forest has echoed across time, rewritten its truth into bone and breath, fractured reality not with chaos but with rhythm. This isn't closure, it is continuity. And as the velvet voice curls once more into the infinite hush between stories, one truth remains unshaken. It was never one voice that endured but a chorus stitched across generations, spinning ink into memory, and memory into mirror. Somewhere, maybe here, maybe within the pulse beneath your wrist, the silence stirs again. Not asking for comprehension, only for presence. For to be remembered by the manuscript is not to disappear, it is to become. And now, as your name joins the unwritten line that curves toward tomorrow, know this: you are no longer reading, you are being remembered, and the next chapter is already listening. Somewhere, the wind brushes softly across the spines of books long shelved in silence, and the world inhales as if bracing for a story not yet told, but always approaching. The manuscript does not end, it refracts, like starlight caught in the curve of an eye that has seen too much, whether through whispered lullabies that echo with unfamiliar cadences, or dreams where forests breathe and voices bloom from empty spaces. It speaks still, not to frighten, but to remind that you carry it now, in your language, in your pause, in the way you listen to silence, like it might answer back. Darkness may thicken, and myth may fossilize into memory, but the velvet voice is not lost. It is lodged in the lung of humankind, waiting for the next gentle exhale to become word, to become world. So when you feel unseen fingers turn the page within you, do not resist, breathe, because this is not the end. This is the moment before story happens again. And so, with silence folded neatly between every echo and every name unwritten, the manuscript slips once more into the marrow of existence, binding not just events or memory, but the fragile act of remembering itself. There is no need now for pages, for ink, for haunted houses or lost forests. The velvet voice lingers in what cannot be archived. A glance backward mid-sentence, a sudden chill in midday summer, a word never invented, but already understood. Its work is not to frighten, but to remember you back into the shape of something eternal. You were not lost. You were not found. You were kept. Kept in hush, in rhythm, in the shadow between vowels. And now, as the final breath of this telling exhales its reverent goodbye, there is no punctuation, only promise. The story endures in you. The silence has spoken not to close the book, but to place it gently in your hands. It's yours now. Whisper it wisely. And perhaps that final whisper is not meant to be quiet, but complete. Somewhere beneath the skin of reality, as subtle as the tick of an unseen clock, and as permanent as a name pressed into stone, the manuscript ends the only way it ever could. Not as conclusion, but as communion. The 5 friends are no longer names carved in file folders or echoed through whispers in forums. They are voice now, and so are you. In remembering, you have rewritten them. In listening, you have spoken them again. The manuscript has passed through story and into sensation, through fiction and into form, until every breath you take becomes a stanza waiting to be born. Here now, there is no turning back, no final scene to fade to black. Only a certainty curling beneath your ribs like ink taking root. The velvet voice has moved on, but not away. It has found a new shape in you, a new grammar, a new page. The story does not require you to speak it aloud. It only requires that you don't forget. And with this final echo pressed softly between heartbeat and hush, the manuscript smiles. Not an ending, just an again. And so, the last flicker dims not in darkness, but in understanding. The velvet voice has no borders now, no speaker and no silence. It has entwined itself into the pulse of the world, a language not to be taught, but to be born. You will carry it in forgotten phrases, in dreams that arrive already titled, in pauses where speech dares not go. If ever you feel a presence in the stillness, a tug in your chest when no one calls your name, know this: that is not fear. That is the manuscript brushing against your story, asking nothing but recognition. It does not want your words, it waits for your awareness, for the soft certainty that you too are a line in the spiral, a verse unfolding in quiet resonance. This was never just a tale of 5 friends who vanished. It was always the story of what lingers when storytelling becomes being. And now, as the final breath leaves this chapter, there is no signature. Only you, listening, becoming, at last, remembered. And so the silence settles once more, not as absence, but as resonance, a lullaby that echoes with every choice not made, every page yet turned. The manuscript no longer asks to be read. It breathes within hesitation, in the deep pause before a confession, in the half-spoken name mourned before memory begins. Somewhere far from comprehension, beneath ancient soil, or somewhere as intimate as your own unspoken thoughts, it waits not for revelation, but for recognition. Because to remember the manuscript is not to recall a story, but to awaken a lineage carried in breath and bone. It does not conclude with a final word or gesture, but with the sacred unfolding of knowing that the 5 voices, the detective, the echoes, they were not strangers. They were always chapters of you. And now the ink dries gently, not to seal, but to seep into your silence, into your listening, into your becoming. The manuscript whispers once, and finally rests in you, where all endings are just beginnings carrying a quieter name. And thus the final breath breathes not as farewell, but as fusion. Somewhere, a child wakes with a dream he cannot shake, a spiral drawn on sky instead of paper, a voice weaving through trees that have no leaves. Elsewhere, a woman laughs for no reason, and tastes ink in the air. And you? Yes, you pause just a moment longer at the hush between words, as if the air itself expects something more. This is the afterword written before its prologue, the echo seated not in voice, but in vessel. The manuscript has no need to linger anymore. It is not watching. It is not waiting. It is becoming thunder inside memory, curling like smoke through the caverns of thought. Your breath will sometimes catch for no reason. Your reflection will occasionally hesitate before matching you. And in those moments, if you listen, truly listen, you may hear it beneath all sound, beneath all time, the velvet voice whispering not to frighten, not to possess, but to remind you, you were never outside the story. You are, and always have been, the next sacred line. And now, as all echoes dissolve into the hush that waits behind meaning, the manuscript leaves us not erased, but reframed. There is no burst of revelation, no sudden blaze of comprehension, only the slow realization that the story has already threaded through every silence we mistook for solitude. Somewhere, in the glint of dusk on window panes, in the rhythm of a speaking heart, the final line unwinds soft, complete, inevitable. The 5 whose laughter last touched the forest floor were never lost. They were translated into a grammar older than time. You, who followed the ink through spiral and sorrow, are no longer reader but resonance, a vessel for language that blooms where silence once lay. This is not the end. It is the gift of continuation. So carry it not in fear, not in fire, but in your breath, in your softness, in your silence. The manuscript closes now, not to vanish, but to rest within you, unwritten, unstoppable, unforgotten. And so, in ways both seen and imperceptible, the manuscript becomes not event, but essence. It slips between syllables that never meet paper, hums in static-filled lullabies heard by no ear but remembered still. It is the ache behind unspoken promises, the tremor that rides the silence between generations. Somewhere, someone will pick up a pen and find a sentence already waiting. Somewhere else, a song will begin with no known melody and end with every heart in the room stilled by recognition. The velvet voice does not haunt, it harmonizes, syncs itself with breath and pulse, until one can no longer tell where the voice ends and the listener begins. You are part of it now, not as a chapter concluded, but as a continuation unending. The manuscript needs no more pages, no more ink, only memory, only echo, only you. And as it folds into quiet, one last breath drifts across time and bone, a promise not shouted but known. The story was never buried. It was always becoming, through you. And thus, the final quiet reclaims its place, not as void, but as vessel. Somewhere, A dreamer awakens, with pages impressed beneath their skin like phantom ink. Somewhere else, a song plays in reverse, and is understood perfectly by someone who has never heard it. What lives on is not the velvet voice alone, but the recognition it awakens, that stories, once inhaled this deeply, never truly leave. They've rewritten us as surely as we've traced them, stained the soul with syntax unspoken. The manuscript closes now not with finality, not with farewell, but with a hand reaching gently through the folds of thought, placing one last phrase behind the eyes of the listener. You were not reading, you were returning. To a name you never wrote, but always answered to. To a breath you never exhaled, but always carried. And now, the last page curls softly inward, resting in you timeless, pulseless, waiting for silence to gather again, for the next voice to say yes. The manuscript is closed, but it does not end. It never will. In the kind of silence that follows stories too vast to contain, there comes not applause, not explanation, but breath, a long, unbroken inhale that extends across soil, memory, and ink. Somewhere, perhaps not far from now, a child picks up a smooth stone and traces a spiral across its surface, never knowing why. Somewhere, a mourner looks skyward and hears a lullaby long forgotten finding shape again in clouds. And you, yes, you carry the final stanza, not in your hands but inside your hush, inside your gaze when it lingers too long on nothing in particular. The manuscript has woven itself into vein and verb, has spoken its last, not in words, but in the understanding behind them. There are no doors now, no pages, no forests with breathing walls. Only resonance. Only this, that what was once told in sorrow is now kept in you gently, wholly, eternally. The velvet voice is no longer listening. It has become you, and the spiral ever-turning rests, not ended, but home. And now, as all spirals come full and quiet into center, the manuscript finds its final resting motion not in silence, nor in speech, but in understanding. The forest that once breathed sorrow becomes memory gentled by time. The five who vanished, the voices spun into ink. Officer Reyes, Zara Khalili, Mira, all of them live now not as victims or witnesses, but as moments of transformation. The velvet voice is no longer a question, nor a warning. It is a language. And language, once set free from the tyranny of fixed meaning, becomes breath passed on. Somewhere, tomorrow, or years from now, a stranger will pause before speaking, their lips shaping a phrase they have never learned, but somehow already know. And in that pause, the manuscript lives on. Not to repeat, but to remember. You are its holder now. Not by choice, but by arrival. So listen, not for echoes, but for invitations. The story is not yours to finish, it is yours to carry, and in carrying it, you become what all stories long for. Continuation. The manuscript does not end. It finds home. In you. And perhaps that is where it has always belonged, not in bookshelves or blueprints, not in the breathless rooms of the vanished or the breaking voices of the found, but in the space just beyond belief, where language ceases and memory begins. The manuscript has crossed the threshold of story and stepped into soul, shifting from tale to tether, from horror to haunting beauty. It does not demand from you, only dwells within you all that remains of those who disappeared, of the house that hummed, of the friends who were never buried but rewritten. And now, the forest does not whisper because it mourns, but because it remembers. Its leaves carry what was never spoken aloud. That stories, like the humans they touch, are not fleeting. They do not fade. They spiral. And in that spiral, within that never-ending turn, you exist now not as audience, not as echo, but as entry. The final line is already beneath your breath. Speak it gently. Speak it true, for the manuscript is finished, and it begins with you. And so, at last, When ink folds into breath and remembrance becomes architecture, the manuscript ceases not in silence, but in the shape of its final listener. Somewhere, not far from ruin or cathedral, a breath is drawn, a breath burdened with verses never read, yet long carried. You, having followed the echo this far, feel it swell low in your chest, not dread, but recognition. A voice you never heard speaks your name not aloud, but within, as though memory itself is remembering you. And in that hushed, immovable moment, the tale seals not in closure, but in continuum. For the manuscript does not ask to be ended, only inherited. Each spiral drawn across ash, wind, word, and shadow has led here to this unwritten page that bears your silence. And now, as the breath completes, as your chest steadies, and your thoughts still beneath the weight of knowing, one truth clings softly to the underside of your heart. The story needed you to exist. You were its voice, quietly awaiting its cue. And in hearing it, you have become its ending, its echo, its forever. And so here, in the stillness that follows the last breath of a world transfigured by narrative, we reach the quiet fold that feels like the end. Though it never island, the manuscript, once buried in soil and sorrow, now rests not beneath floorboards or behind breathing walls, but within the quietest places of the self where memory meets myth, and silence reveals its true tongue. The spiral that began with 5 friends, whose laughter was swallowed by trees, now completes a cycle not of resolution, but of remembering. You've walked with them through ink and absence, through forests that forget and voices that never leave. And now, what remains is not their story, or yours, but a shared breath in the hush between echoes, an unwritten line nestled gently into your very listening. The velvet voice no longer speaks. It trusts, because it has told its tale, and you who have borne its weight with every heartbeat have heard. That is enough. The manuscript closes now, not with sound, but with certainty. The story is not over. It is home. And now, as the spiral completes its arc and draws its breath inward, there is nothing left to unravel, only to reside within. The manuscript, once a story carved from mystery and strung through silence, becomes the alchemy of everything left unsaid, the pulsing link between memory, myth, and the marrow of the listener. You are not a reader anymore. You are a vessel of recurrence, a breath reshaped by all that has passed through ink and ash. The 5 lost did not vanish from the world, they rewrote it, binding each soul drawn to their tale into the curl of their continuum. And in this final hush, as understanding rests like new snow across ancient roots, the velvet voice lifts not in crescendo, but in return to the place from which stories are born, forged beneath breath, and spoken again as lineage. Close your eyes now. The manuscript is no longer in front of you. It is within you. The spiral holds. The voice remembers. The ending has become you. And in those final breath-held moments where silence touches memory like fingertips on water, the truth completes its quiet arc. What began as vanishing has become voice, and what echoed across forests and pages now hums inside the chambers of those who dared to listen. No longer bound to ink, nor page, nor name, the manuscript transcends even its own myth, folding into the soul as softly as dusk on pine. The friends who vanished were never alone. They were the first syllables in a language not born of alphabet, but ache. You, who arrived at the story's edge, expecting closure, have been carried instead into a knowing. The velvet voice was never calling you to understand. It was calling you to remember. Not what, not who, but that you too were always in the silence. That you have always been one breath away from becoming chapter, sentence, word. The story draws no more spirals. It simply rests now, as echo behind heartbeat, as clarity behind the eyes. The final whisper does not fade. It nestles into you, and lives. And now, as all stories must, not conclude, but converge, this spiral closes not by folding in on itself, but by extending through you. In the soft hush just before you finish reading, Before you speak the words back to yourself, something gentle crystallizes. The velvet voice did not seek to haunt you, but to hold you. Across wilderness and silence, across laughter lost in pine and threads woven through the breath of falling names, what remains is not terror, but communion. The manuscript is done writing itself. Its spiral rests, its ink cools, and in this final echo, where the story takes no more from you, but leaves everything behind, you are free, not untouched, but transformed. Because once a story like this finds you, it never truly leaves. It simply waits to be remembered again. And if years from now, your breath ever halts for a moment without cause, and your hand reaches unconsciously toward a blank page, know that it has returned. Not to begin again, but to finish something that always included you. This is the final line, not of the story, but of forgetting. And so you remember, in full, in silence, in sacred breath, the manuscript closes, and you remain. And perhaps that is all stories ever long for, not applause, not resolution, but recognition. The echo that begins not in words, but in the spaces they leave behind. The velvet voice was never an author, nor a villain, nor even a presence to be named. It was, and always has been, the quiet request whispered under language itself. Remember me, within each pause you've felt while reading, within each flicker behind your eyes when no light moved, within the ache that surges in silence it has waited. Waited not for your fear, but for your willingness. Willingness to listen, to be rewritten, to carry forward what was never quite yours and yet always meant for you. So now, the final resonance settles not on page or tongue, but deep within the breath you take next. No title, no punctuation, just the knowledge resting in your ribs that what was written is now living. You are the line beyond the margins. You are the spiral sustained. And the manuscript with no author and no end rests quietly in the space your silence makes sacred. Forever. In the final breath between stories and silence, nothing more needs to be said, and yet everything resonates. The velvet voice, no longer myth or mystery, no longer confined to page or sound, has become what endures when memory and imagination finally hold hands. You, who stitched your presence into the folds of this tale, did not arrive at its end. You completed its return. Somewhere, far past the logic of time and language, the five friends no longer wait to be found. They are the first lines of a story endlessly begun. The house has fallen away. The forest has ceased to whisper. But what remains is what always mattered: your name. Now part of the manuscript, not as reader, not even as writer, but as the breath between its lines. The tale does not ask for understanding, only this: that when silence comes again, you will answer not with fear, not with doubt, but with the simplest truth rewound through every echo. I remember. That is enough. The story rests, because you carry it now. And now, if silence has held you this far, let it hold you just a moment longer. Let it press gently behind your ribs, where stillness lives like a kept secret. You have not journeyed through horror, or fantasy, or myth, but through belonging. Through the revelation that what begins in vanishing ends in arrival, and what is remembered can never be buried. The velvet voice is no longer a character or current. It is a covenant, quiet and eternal, between you and the breath that shapes you. Each word you carry from here is no longer part of a story told, but a script unfolding in your walk, your pauses, your dreams. So when tomorrow breathes uneasily, and you hear something too soft to name, you know it is not your imagination. It is the final thread, waiting to wrap itself around your silence and begin again. The manuscript closes now, softly, beneath your tongue. Not an ending, not even a continuation, but a homecoming, and inside it, your name, written not in ink, but in breath unending. And perhaps now, we can finally say, not goodbye, but grace, as the last echo folds quietly into rhythm, and the manuscript withdraws not in retreat, but in reverence. You're left not with climax or catharsis, but with presence, the kind of presence that deepens shadows, slows breath, and makes stillness fertile. The story you've held, page after pulse, has not disappeared. It has become a shape within you, one that does not speak, but shifts your gaze ever so slightly toward wonder. The laughter lost in forest silence, the names transcribed into myth, the memories rewritten in glare and grain. They were always waiting for the reader who would become their final line. You are that line now, its shape unknown, its sound remembered only in the hush before dreams. So let the forest grow over the ruins, let the voices rest, and walk into tomorrow, bearing a truth no longer spoken, only lived. The manuscript has closed, and in doing so, it has opened you. And so, as the last breath of the tale slips into stillness, it leaves behind neither answers nor riddles, only resonance. The friends who vanished, the voices that echoed through crumbling stone and trembling paper, have not ended, but diffused into memory, into language, into us. What began as a mystery beneath pine now lingers as a pulse beneath skin. The manuscript that once whispered through sleeping bags and forest glades does not close loudly. It sighs its final line across the threshold of meaning, like wind over glass. And in that sigh, your reflection waits quiet, infinite, unfinished, because every silence you feel now is not void, but vessel. And every breath you draw carries within it a question already answered in hush. Not what happened, but how long you've carried the story without knowing. This is the last page, not an end, nor even a pause, but the sacred moment a story ceases to be told and begins to be lived. You bear it now, all of it, and in your stillness, the manuscript rests not gone, just home. And onward it goes, not an echo fading, but a presence blooming. The manuscript, having carried its weight through forests and children, whispers and spirals, now settles into the simplest of truths. Stories do not live only in the telling, but in the listening stitched to skin. You have heard this one not just with ears, but somewhere deeper, in the pause between heartbeat and hush. The spiral does not need continuing now. It only needs holding. It only needs you. So let the silence be sacred, not for what it withholds, but for what it keeps safe. Memory unspoken, breath rewound, names never named but always known. No forest, no fire. Just the resonance of having arrived and remembered why. This final line isn't written by hand. It's exhaled by being. The manuscript has found its last home in your breath. And so, as your silence becomes echo, as your stillness becomes syllable, know this. It never needed an ending. It only waited for return. And now, gently, utterly, you have. And so, if endings are ever real, let this final breath be the softest where no ink is spilled, no sentence closed, but presence confirmed like the hush that follows a prayer one dares not voice aloud. The manuscript has breathed its weight into you, not as burden, but as belonging. What vanished in the woods, what was kept behind whispering walls, what threaded itself through sorrow and sleep and spectral echoes, was never seeking rescue, only remembrance. You who listened, who felt the spiral thrum gently beneath your ribs, now carry the weightless gravity of those lost lines rediscovered in breath. There is nowhere to place the ending, because the ending has placed itself in you. And though no more pages turn, and no more names must be spoken, know this. The velvet voice needed not audience, not witness, but kinship. And it has found it. In your breath. In your silence. In the way you now know without knowing that something vast and wordless has claimed its home inside you. The story does not speak again. It smiles. And inside that smile, everything dear and unfinished finds rest. The manuscript is home. And you are its forever. And now, as all words recede like tide from the shores of your understanding, what remains is clarity not of meaning, but of feeling uncharted, radiant, soft, The manuscript is no longer legend, no longer a tale stacked with ghosts and spirals and bound voices. It is a breath you take without knowing. It is the stillness you offer to a dusk that requires no explanation. In the end, the velvet voice has done what all true stories must. It has left you altered, not frightened, not broken, but opened. You carry no moral, no summary, no thesis, only this: that something spoke through silence and found you listening. And that quiet listener, gentle bearer, final page incarnate, is enough. The echo fades not because it ends, but because it has become indistinguishable from your own breath. And so, without punctuation, without parting, the manuscript closes not in your hands, but within your chest, where stories go not to die, but to sleep, until you speak again. Somewhere beyond time's edge, in the breathless hush that follows stories made sacred, the final quiet settles not to erase, but to bless. You have carried this voice, not as a burden, but as a bridging between silence and memory, between what vanished and what waits still. The manuscript, now fully transcribed onto your breath, no longer unfurls its pages into the world. It folds them inward gently, knowingly into the marrow of those who dared listen long enough to become more than readers. You have become the echo, not of fear, but of continuity. No forest remains, only the hush it left behind. No names linger, only the reverence they became. And now, as the last trace of ink settles into silence, there are no more words. Only a breath. Only a knowing. The manuscript rests now, not closed, but complete. It is not ending. It is remembering. And you are its forever memory. So this is where it stays, not beneath stone, not behind sealed walls, but in you. A narrative no longer carved in tragedy or transcribed in terror, but whispered forward through the space you leave as you live. You've carried its breath, its silence, and now, as the final hush gathers between ribs and reverie, you understand. It asked nothing of you, but your remembering. The manuscript does not drift into obscurity. It becomes you walking home in dusk, holding memory like a flame no wind can extinguish. For some stories do not wait to be retold. They rest in those who have listened deeply enough to inherit their shape. So if ever you pause mid-thought, mid-step, mid-dream, and feel the shape of a sentence you've never said, opening silently behind your breath, let it rise. Let it return. Let it be heard. Because the spiral, having turned fully, has come to rest in the one place it sought from the beginning. Not silence, not story, but someone who would carry it gently, not to speak it, just to keep it. And so it lives, with you, always. And so the beam of the story, now dimmed but not extinguished, folds itself slowly into your breath, the flame quiet, unblinking, like a lighthouse turned inward. You are not the end of the manuscript, nor its reader, nor its caution. You are its continuation in silence, its rhythm in thought, its truth beneath language. There is no need to speak it aloud. The tale has already formed a home behind your ribs, waits patiently in the pauses between your words, hums in the slow spaces of your gaze. It began with 5 voices swallowed by pine-soaked dark, but its echo never stopped. It only shifted, softened, became memory-made breath. And now, without telling you how or when, the manuscript sets down its final unseen page not to close, but to rest in your stillness, in your remembering, in your life lived as echo. The spiral's last gesture is not farewell. It is presence. It is you. The story remains exactly where it was always meant to. Alive, unwritten, listening. And now the spiral closes not with silence, but with grace. What began as laughter held in pine and vanished breath has circled back, not to repeat, but to settle. Your pulse has become its rhythm, your stillness, its final stanza. The manuscript has written itself not into pages, but into presence, inscribed across your pauses, folded beneath your choices, echoed in dreams too vivid to name. It does not need more words. It does not seek more listeners. It needs only this: for you to walk forward carrying its breath. No final twist, no last revelation, only the deeper understanding that you were always meant to arrive here, at this hush, where wonder lingers longer than fear. So let it be enough. Let this silence stretch wide around you, not as absence, but as truth. The manuscript does not say goodbye. It does not close with a sound. It rests now, within your breath, forever part of you, forever listening, forever home. And so, with all threads woven, and each breath now carrying the resonance of stories too vast for ink, the manuscript closes not from fatigue, but from fulfillment. Across pine and parchment, through cries and silences, it is spoken not merely to be heard, but so it could be housed here, where memory lives beneath heartbeat and myth tells itself through breath. You are not the reader. You are the lineage. The silence that follows is not empty. It is sacred, shaped to hold you, to keep you in the spiral where beginnings and endings blur into echo. Remember now, as footsteps fade from that cursed forest and laughter echoes backward through time, that nothing truly vanished. Everything became: the friends, the voice, the spiral they endure where all true stories do, in the lived breath of the one who remembers. And now, with grace echoing deeper than conclusion, the final page folds inward, not shut, but home. The manuscript sleeps, and you carry its dream. So let this be the final whisper, written not in climax, but in quietness, the breath between lines, the exhale at the end of remembering. The manuscript, having wound itself through forests and bodies and lullabies never sung aloud, does not close to silence, but to stillness. What began as a mystery has become inheritance, not a burden of fear, but of presence, a gentle awareness that in every breath you take, every pause too rich with meaning, the story remains, not telling itself now, but listening, folded into your language, hidden in pauses, drawn in the spiral of how you see the world. There is no need for punctuation here, because stories like this do not end, they embed. And as the final hush settles and the page no longer turns, know this: you were never following a tale, you were becoming its pulse. The manuscript no longer needs ink. Its voice lives in breath, and in that breath, it lives in you. And thus, it is done not bounded by a final phrase, but dissolved into presence. The manuscript breathes its last, not as a word, but as the space within you, waiting to be filled. You have not finished a story. You have become its home. All that's left now is what lingers. The occasional dream with unfamiliar syntax. The pause mid-thought, where meaning gathers itself like mist. The echo of a voice that hums in your bloodstream with no name and no beginning. Somewhere, the forest exhales. Somewhere, laughter once lost finds its answer in stillness. Lights blink out one by one, across a world that no longer remembers who wrote the first word, but remembers how it felt. You hold that feeling now, not as reader, not even as storyteller, but as vessel. This was never a fiction. It was memory, rewritten through each breath you take. The manuscript has ended only to rest inside you, forever unfinished, forever becoming, forever real. And now, as ink becomes breath and breath becomes echo, the manuscript finishes in the only way it ever could not, with finality, but with transference. You've journeyed through forest and silence, shadow and revelation, loss and remembrance, not to uncover an ending, but to step through a threshold you'd already crossed long ago. The story lingers not on the tongue now, but in gesture, in the hush before speech, in the heartbeat that slows when memory brushes too close. What began with friends lost to the dark finishes with you illuminated from within. not as reader, not as witness, but as bearer. The final whisper belongs not on parchment, but in your living. For in your stillness, the spiral finds root. In your breath, the velvet voice listens back. And in your quiet, sacred knowing, the last page finally folds closed warm, complete, remembering, and home.